Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sistren. It's news that's nightly about the Redskins. Welcome to the Redskins Nightly News. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Let's get to tonight's lead story. So, in reading a story yesterday in the Washington Post by Les Carpenter, it kind of shed some light on the entire front office structure, and there were a lot of rumors swirling around Alex Smith because of his presence in the press box with owner Daniel Snyder, Bruce Allen, and team officials at every Redskins home game. And then you saw the mass response to Urban Meyer being at the game this past weekend, and there were so many rumors coming out of that, and people were trying to connect dots. And so Les Carpenter wrote a story that was in the Washington Post. I want to say it was yesterday, and or at least that's when I read it, was yesterday. Anyway, Les Carpenter's story pretty much hit on a number of different topics. I've said some of this stuff to you guys already, and so for some of the things that were said in the story, I've already kind of hammered home. And again, I don't know anything with 100% certainty. This is just me trying to draw inferences off of the things that I've seen now and some of the things that I've heard. But, you know, he's actually talking to people inside the building. So his credibility and his words hold a lot more weight than mine because he's actually got people that can substantiate some of the things that he has said. With me, I'm just speculating, like pretty much the rest of you guys out there. I'm just guessing. I'm taking a stab at it. And so some of the things that were said leads me to believe that changes are coming. But then again, some of the things that he said leads you to believe that there could be no change and that, you know, everything's up for debate as to what will happen. But one thing's for sure, I've told you guys over and over again that Alex Smith isn't focused on becoming a member of the Redskins front office, but rather he wants to play. He's not done playing football in his mind. All of this rehabbing and all of this working out, trying to get back, isn't so that he can be a general manager. It's so that he can play quarterback again, whether it's for the Washington Redskins or some other franchise. Doesn't really matter, I think, to him. I think he would like to make it the Washington Redskins. I mean, he's doing all of this work here in this building for a reason. But at the end of the day, Alex Smith wants to play football. He wants to complete this tremendous comeback that everyone said he couldn't do. He wants to prove everyone wrong. So I've said this all along. Alex Smith isn't looking to be anybody's team president, general manager, liaison, anything. He's not looking to be a member of the Redskins front office right now. Maybe that's something that he is striving towards in the future. But right now, he's getting ready to prepare as if he's going to have a chance to start for the Redskins in 2020. How realistic is that? I don't know. But he's preparing himself to be ready when training camp rolls around in 2020 to have an opportunity to be on this roster and be an active member of this roster and not just holding up a roster spot. So in this story, Les Carpenter talks about how Alex Smith has not mentioned to one single person that he's looking for work in the front office. As a matter of fact, he pretty much said, I want to play. I still want to play. It's the reason that he's going to treatment. It's the reason he's working out. It's the reason that he still has a locker in the locker room at FedEx Field. There's a reason that Alex Smith is still going through the motions as if he's a player because he still views himself as such, and he's preparing himself to be one at some point again. So I don't think Alex Smith is looking forward to being in anybody's front office. He's looking to play on the field again, and that story pretty much reiterated that. Alex Smith has not once made mention of wanting to be in anybody's front office. As a matter of fact, far from it. He wants to play, and he's made that abundantly clear to anyone that will listen that he wants to play football still. So for all of you out there that is holding on to this Alex Smith as the new GM or team president or whatever, and Les Carpenter even expounded upon that to say, look, one of the biggest reasons Alex Smith is in the press box is because he hasn't been cleared to be on the sidelines. With his injury and the way that it's healed, he's at risk being on the sidelines to the action because, you know, guys get knocked out of bounds all the time. Guys are always, coming into the sidelines. The action spills into the sidelines from time to time. How many times have we seen coaches, because, coaches are usually older guys, can't get out of the way, get knocked down. It happens all the time. Alex Smith is in no position to protect himself right now. And so if the action were to spill over the sidelines and he can't get out of the way, he could injure himself. So he hasn't been cleared to come down to the sidelines. So he's found himself up in the press box. Take it a step further, his wife, because of the injury and the time that Alex has been spending at Redskins Park and in the press box, has become really tight with Tanya Snyder, which is Daniel Snyder's wife. And so they forged a bond together. And so now she's at home games. Every home game that the Redskins have that Alex attends, she's there. And so that's another reason why he's in the press box. So that was another piece of the story. So when you're starting to put pieces of that puzzle together, make sure you understand that Alex Smith is not looking to become a member of the Redskins front office, but rather he's looking to still play. Now, when you talk about Bruce Allen and his standing in this organization, there have been reports. I know you guys know about Bruce Allen being in attendance at the owner meetings last week. I remember I read a comment from a viewer of the show last week when I did the social media maneuvers that said, hey, my wife happened to be out at dinner. He said, yes, I live in Cowboys country. I live in Texas. And you remember the owners meetings were in Texas. And he said, yeah, my wife didn't run into, but saw, Daniel Snyder, Bruce Allen, and all of those guys at the owner meetings last week. And so I read that comment to you guys, and that's been substantiated. That has been verified. He was in attendance at the owner meetings. Everything has been status quo up until this point. Remember, last week, everyone was going crazy. It was mass hysteria. Bruce was going to be fired as early as last week. Nothing happened. I said, look, if this does happen, if something does take place, I don't think it's going to happen until the end of the season. I made that very clear. I still don't think anything's going to happen. Let me reiterate that point while we're here. But if something were to happen, I told you I don't think it's going to happen until the end of the season, and I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in a malicious way. It's going to be done in a tactful way that makes Bruce look like he either wanted out or there's a mutual parting of ways, so to speak, or that he wants to retire on his own terms. So again, as I've mentioned to you numerous times, I could care less how it happens. I just want him gone and have nothing to do with this organization moving forward. But bottom line is, the article talks about how Bruce Allen and Daniel Snyder are being seen with each other less and less as the weeks progress. It used to be a known fact that up in the press box, you were going to find Dan and Bruce. After the game was over, they were going to sit and talk about the game and the state of the organization for maybe an additional 2-3 hours, sometimes into the wee hours of the morning. Generally, that doesn't happen, but it has happened in the past. And then they were going to leave together in, a couple of black SUVs out of the stadium. Well, it's been known over the last couple of weeks that Dan is leaving at a different time than Bruce. Bruce is leaving much earlier than Dan. They haven't been seen down on the field together. They used to always venture down to the field before the game. Pre-game ritual was to walk around the field, kind of talk to the players, other owners, that sort of thing, coaches, that sort of thing. They're not doing that together anymore. You're seeing less and less of them together, more of Daniel Snyder and Alex Smith together, less of Daniel Snyder and Bruce Allen together. Now, someone in the building on a condition of anonymity said, look, there is a little something to that in terms of not seeing Bruce with Dan. That has been their thing for the last 3 or 4 years strong. So the fact that they're not doing it now, maybe you can start reading tea leaves. However, don't read too much into it, because right now, nothing has been decided. As a matter of fact, in the story, Les actually has a quote from a Redskins high-level executive that remains anonymous that said, look, Daniel Snyder hasn't really made a decision on Bruce Allen's future yet. He doesn't really know what he's going to do, which for me is a very troubling sign, because he should already know what he wants to do by now. He should already know and be saying to himself, either Bruce is going to be back or he's not going to be back. The fact that he hasn't decided that yet probably means that Bruce is going to be back, because if 3-13, 3-11, 3-12, 4-12, 4-11, whatever the case may be, if that's not good enough, as we sit here at 3-11 right now with 2 games to go, if this season hasn't been a train wreck, enough. If the Trent Williams situation wasn't a train wreck, enough. If the fact that other prospective coaches that you've reached out to have said, hey, I got a little bit of concern about Bruce Allen being in the organization. If you coming to the realization that Bruce being here is a problem in terms of hiring the next coach potentially, if all of those things thrown into the same pot and stirred up doesn't make your decision for you, then I don't think anything will. So I really am not confident, after reading this Les Carpenter story. Now, again, there is the piece about them not being seen together as much and them not being around each other as often as they used to be, which could be a sign of a little bit of a fracture and Dan trying to distance himself from Bruce to go ahead and be able to make the move. But at the end of the day, this week, and JP Finley tweeted out the fact that this week, the Redskins are starting their preliminary 2020 offseason meetings, starting, talking about the free agency period and the draft, and they're starting to get together to figure those things out. And Bruce Allen was in attendance at that meeting and is going to be running those meetings as far as everyone can tell. So right now, everything is status quo. If he weren't going to be around, why would he be allowed to be in those meetings and probably spearheading a lot of what's being said in those meetings? I don't get the sense that anything's going to be done quite yet. But again, we still got a lot of time. I know some of you are really starting to get antsy. I remember last week it was crazy. Everyone was waiting. Every single ESPN that went off on your phone, every Bleacher Report alert that you got, every alert that you have on your phone that comes in from any of your sports apps, you were rushing to your phone to check to see if this was the one that was going to give you your early Christmas gift, and it didn't come. And I don't anticipate it coming prior to Christmas. If it does happen, I think it's going to be after Christmas, after the season has met its conclusion. But again, I don't anticipate it coming at all. We'll see what happens. But I think if you're a fan that wants to be in the know, stories like the one that Les Carpenter wrote in the Washington Post on Monday are must-reads. I think those are the types of stories that kind of give you a little insight into what's going on at Redskins Park and what you should be expecting. Right now, I'm not expecting much. All right? I told you guys from the jump, my 33% is staying there. It's not moving until Bruce is fired, because I am not convinced that he's going to get canned this year. I do think it's a higher probability this year than it was last year or any year prior to that. But I still don't know if he's necessarily on the chopping block. And this article written by Les Carpenter pretty much spells that out, that Daniel Snyder has not made a decision on the future of Bruce Allen or anybody else in this organization for that matter. Hell, we could be looking at Bill Callahan as our next head coach for all we know. No decisions have been made. I think the one thing I feel confident in saying, I will go out on the record and go out on a limb and say that Daniel Snyder is looking for a big fish as a head coach. He's not, I don't think that Callahan fits exactly what he wants to do. Now, Bruce Allen, on the other hand, I think he would love nothing more than to make Bill Callahan the permanent head coach here. He would love to make that hire. I don't think that's what Daniel Snyder has in mind, though. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if Bruce is kept on as team president and kept in the same capacity, if Bill Callahan has a legitimate shot. Because if Bruce has anything to do with it, I think he would love nothing more than to give Callahan the opportunity to prove that had he gotten this job sooner this season, that this thing could have been turned around and we could potentially be talking about the Redskins, not just the Cowboys and Eagles, being in the mix in the NFC East down the stretch of this season. I think he's trying to convince Dan that, hey, look how close we've been. Look, we went to Lambeau and almost won. We should have beat the Eagles this past week. We could have beaten the Bills. We could have beaten the Vikings. These are all playoff teams. Had we had Callahan in from week 1, we might have beat the Eagles in week 1. We might have been 7-6 right now, or 7-7 right now, going into week number 15 or 16, and we might have been in the mix. And so he might be telling Dan all this stuff. Dan may be taking it all in, looking at some of these final games and looking at how hard the Redskins have been playing for Bill Callahan, where you see teams across the league getting their brains bashed in and have quit on their coach. It hasn't happened here. The Redskins have been down 14-0 in ball games early and have won one in Carolina, and also came back and scratched and clawed versus Green Bay and almost had a shot in that game. And he could be convincing Dan that, hey, we're close. Give me another year with Callahan this time, and I will bring back some results. We've got a lot of young talent. They're showing you the promise that they have. If you give me another year with Callahan as the coach, you've seen the discipline. You've seen the turnaround in this team. They're playing hard. They're playing competitive football. You give me another year, we can turn it around. And maybe Dan's buying it, hook, line, and sinker. Who knows? I'm just telling you, when you read that story, Dan hasn't made up his mind yet. And to me, that spells trouble for this organization, because it sounds like Bruce Allen still has some wiggle room to weasel his way back into this organization. Well, I shouldn't even say wiggle his way and weasel his way back in, because he hasn't been ousted. So it's not like he left to try to come back in. I think he still has an opportunity to get Daniel Snyder to see that this isn't as bad as it seems record-wise. Could be a blessing in disguise, and that they are on the cusp of doing something big, or as Bruce likes to say, hey, we're close. So we'll see, but that's a must read, that Les Carpenter story that was in the Post some 2 days ago, or I think it was yesterday, actually, that was in the Post, that talks about the front office, talks about Alex Smith and his role in this organization moving forward, and the fact that Daniel Snyder really hasn't made a decision quite yet. And that doesn't bode well for us as fans that want change. Does not bode well at all. I do not think that Bill Callahan will be back as head coach, but you just never know, because if Bruce is here, Bruce has the authority. Bruce may want to have, because Callahan is a Bruce guy. Remember that. Callahan is a Bruce Allen guy, and it wouldn't shock me if Bruce is still here, that Callahan remains here as the head coach as well. But we will see. Let's go ahead and transition into in other news. So I know this is a little bit of old news, and then the rest of the guys that were put on IR is all new news. But I want to go back first and talk about Paul Richardson being put on IR last week, because we never talked about that. It happened on Friday. We were already off the air for the week, so we never really got a chance to talk about Paul Richardson being placed on IR. And when we jumped back in, it was all about the game that had just passed on Sunday, and the Urban Meyer news, or really the rumors and him being at the game and that sort of thing. So kind of lost in the shuffle was the fact that Paul Richardson was placed on IR. And we had talked about Paul Richardson last week on the Redskins Nightly News because he practiced and we thought he would be back. Then he re-aggravated his injury. Redskins went ahead, put him on IR. The reason I want to talk about it is because this could spell the end of Paul Richardson in Washington. I know some of you wouldn't be that sad to see him go. I would be really disappointed. I felt like first of all, a lot of you complained about the fact that the Redskins signed him knowing of his injury history. I get that, and you're not wrong in your assessment. I wanted Paul Richardson. I was a huge advocate, and a lot of you did too. I hope you don't have revisionist history, because a lot of you wanted Paul Richardson when he was on the free agent market. I was one of them. I wanted him badly. So did Jay Gruden, and the move was made. And I thought it was a lot of money for Paul Richardson. I will admit that. But if that's what it took to get him here, I was all for it. And I was hoping that his injury concerns and injury history was behind him, and that he could come here, start anew, and all of a sudden become the receiver that we saw flashes and glimpses of in Seattle here on a full-time basis. That never came to fruition. He couldn't stay healthy. It just didn't work out. And we could have seen the last of Paul Richardson in the Redskins uniform. That is very possible. That is a very realistic scenario where the Redskins decide to cut bait with him in the offseason, free up some cap space. I think the Redskins would only have about like $2.5 million of dead money, something along those lines, of his salary that they would have to eat to cut him loose. And I think they would save something like $6.5 million in the process, something along those lines. Either way, I think it's something that the Redskins do have to consider this offseason. I would not be opposed to bringing him back. I still think he has something to offer. But if the Redskins said, look, we got a bunch of young guys that we like, Steven Sims, Cam Sims, Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, and then we're going to draft another young guy. We're good at receiver. They still like Darvin Kidsey, it sounds like. If they said, nah, we're good, Paul Richardson hasn't shown that he can stay healthy, we're going to go in a different direction, I wouldn't be opposed to that. And if they said, you know what, we still feel like there's something here with Paul Richardson, and if he can just stay healthy, we feel like the best is yet to come, and they decide to keep him, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. But he's been placed on IR, and I personally think that we've seen the last of Paul Richardson, especially if Bruce Allen isn't here. If Allen remains here, then I think Paul Richardson will remain here because that's a Bruce Allen signing. He wants to make sure that Paul Richardson stays here and proves him right. Even though that was more of a Jay Gruden signing, still it was under Bruce Allen's watch. I think Bruce would want to see this thing through. However, if Bruce isn't here and the next guy comes in, they may say, let's cut bait on this guy and move on. We'll see what happens. But I thought it was pretty interesting that Paul Richardson's season was over. He was placed on IR prior to the Eagles game, and we may have seen the last of Paul Richardson in a Redskins uniform. And if that is in fact the case, it's a pretty disappointing signing in a long list of pretty disappointing signings by Bruce Allen. Other IR news today, it was determined that Brandon Sheriff would be placed on IR. He could have played his last snap as a Washington Redskin. We'll see what the offseason holds for him. I'm kind of excited to see Wes Martin these final 2 games of the season. You couple that with what he did last week versus the Eagles, and if he has 2 strong performances to finish up, I'm hearing a lot of him potentially playing center and moving Chase Rouillet to guard. I've heard a lot of that, and then re-signing Eric Flowers. But some people out there think that Eric Flowers could command a ton of money on the free agent market, and that the Redskins may deem that he's too expensive for them and rather spend their money on Sheriff instead. This offseason along the offensive line going to be pretty damn interesting because you could be playing musical chairs with your interior offensive linemen. You could bring Sheriff back. Flowers could be out. You could move Rouillet to then left guard and then move and insert Wes Martin to center. You could keep Wes Martin at right guard, keep Rouillet at center, and keep Eric Flowers at left guard and go about it that way. Or you could totally revamp this whole thing and Chase Rouillet could be playing left guard, Wes Martin could be playing right guard, and you could bring in a totally new center in Ross Pierce-Baker, we don't know what's going to happen. Donald Penn has played really well. Do you bring him back on another 1-year deal? Do you go out and draft the left tackle? What's the whole deal with that situation? There's so many situations and scenarios that could play out this offseason, but Sheriff has been placed on IR. So has Trey Quinn, another wide receiver that a lot of you are down on. I am not down on Trey Quinn. However, it has been proven already that Steven Sims is a better option in the slot. But guess what? What's better than 1 slot option? 2 slot options. There's no rule that says you can't have Trey Quinn and Steven Sims Jr. on the roster at the same time. There's nothing that's etched in stone that says you can't have more than 1 slot receiver. So last time I checked, it's okay for Steven Sims, Trey Quinn, Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, Cam Sims, whoever else you want to add, and Darvin Kidsey, all these guys to be invited to camp next year and have them duke it out for maybe 5, possibly upwards of 6 spots and leave it at that. So I'm all for everybody coming back next season, all of them having, because what happens if Steven Sims, knock on wood, what happens if he gets injured next year in camp and you moved on from Trey Quinn and now we don't have a slot? Like, these are all things you have to keep in mind. I like Trey Quinn personally, all right? And I think he's got good football left in him, and he's a young football player. No, he's not dynamic like Steven Sims, but there's a place in the league for guys like Trey Quinn. And so I think that I want to see more of him. I want to see more of him in a Redskin uniform. I know some of you are done with Trey Quinn, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with you being done with him. I, however, am not. like to see him back, but he's been placed on IR with that concussion, will not return this season. And then Jimmy Moreland, also placed on IR. And look, we're getting to the point of the season now where if you just sprain your ankle, all right, if you've got any kind of mild injury that's going to keep you out a week, then you might as well just put that player on IR and bring somebody else up. So we're at the point of the season now where if you've got a leg contusion and you may miss a game, well, you might as well just miss the rest of the season. There's 2 games left. So don't read too much into the Jimmy Moreland injury. I don't think it's anything really serious, but the fact that we've only got 2 games left and he's probably going to miss this week's game, might as well just put him on IR and see what you have on the roster. And so if there's a guy that's been itching to get opportunity and you really want to see what he can do, here's the opportunity to bring him up and give him some playing time and give him some film. So not only you can assess him, but other teams around the league can take a look at him as well. So like a guy like Danny Johnson took full advantage of the opportunity that he was given last week. I thought he was phenomenal. And so you get an opportunity to see some other guys potentially in various roles on the roster. And so those 3 guys have now been placed on IR in addition to Ryan Kerrigan last week and, of course, Paul Richardson, who I just spoke of as well. So IR starting to get very, very full for the Redskins, but it's that time of the season now that we're coming down home stretch. Can you believe it? Only 2 more weeks of watching our boys bless the field. I know it's been a long season and it's been tough at times, but it's gotten a lot better towards the end of the season, and you must give Bill Callahan credit for that. As much as I don't want him back as a coach, it's been a lot better than Jay. I can tell you that much. And, you know, Jay was my guy, but I knew Jay had to go. And Callahan has had these boys ready to play just about every week outside of the Jets game, where I came up here and I ranted. Outside of that game, they've been in just about every ball game. I don't necessarily know if they were playing to win right off the bat. You know, there were some games in there where I'm like, they were playing not to lose instead of to win. You know, that Vikings game on a Thursday night kind of felt like they were playing not to lose instead of playing to win. The Bills game kind of felt like they were playing not to lose in Dwayne's first start instead of playing to win. But after that, I thought they went out and they tried to win games and they just weren't good enough. But Callahan has had these boys prepared. Maybe not in the first quarter where we've gotten off to these slow starts, but thereafter, this team has been competitive for the vast majority of these Bill Callahan coached ball games. So got to give credit where it's due, but I still don't want him to be the Redskins' long-term solution at the head coaching position. But I do want to get into some social media maneuvers and read some comments that I thought were very interesting that were left on the Redskins Nightly News from yesterday. So I start off with this comment from Caps Fan. He says, opposing tight ends have been killing us for a decade. And speaking of tight ends, we need tight ends for our offense very badly next year. He says, it needs to be an offseason priority. Sprinkle is fine as a number 3, makes a play now and then, but overall stinks. Too many drops and not an impact player at all. I couldn't agree with him more in just about everything he just said. I've talked about the Redskins being annihilated by tight ends. I said we couldn't allow Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert to kill us, and what did they do? They killed us. And he said we need tight ends. That's been apparent all season long. One of the biggest parts of our offense that have been lacking is the lack of a tight end, a real threat at the tight end position. I think Dwayne would be aided by having a guy that he can get the football to over the middle of the field that can attract some coverage, that can win over the middle of the field consistently. He's wanted Sprinkle to be that guy. Sprinkle just isn't that guy, as simple as that. So I think that is a very true statement that Caps Fan wrote in his comment. Zimba Sexy One says, Chase Young actually wants to play for the Redskins. I've seen a couple of tweets between him and Dwayne about playing for the same team. Plus, Dwayne is one of Chase's best friends. So when I heard the news of him not wanting to apply for the draft, I knew he was doing that just to gauge the temperature of teams. And so I can't substantiate anything that Zimba Sexy One said. It makes a lot of sense. They both went to Ohio State together. They're both from the DMV area. Both of them were initially enrolled in Maryland and then changed their minds and vaulted for Ohio State. But I can't say that they're best friends. I can't say that the tweets that they've been sharing back and forth legitimately means he wants to be a Redskin. All I know is that Chase Young floated that out there for a reason. What that reason was, I speculated on the show yesterday saying that maybe he doesn't want to be a New York Giant. Maybe he wants to be a Redskin. Maybe he doesn't want to be a Redskin. Maybe he wants to be a Giant. I don't know what that situation entails. I just know he threw that out there for a reason. I'm thinking it's more of the former rather than the latter, meaning he doesn't want to be a Giant, but more rather be a Washington Redskin because he would like to come home because the Giants currently hold the number 2 pick in the draft. And so in his mind, he may be saying, hey, I don't want to be a New York Giant. And that's his a roundabout way of saying that without actually saying that. I would much rather be a Redskin. We'll see what happens. We'll see what he determines or decides to do. And we'll see if the draft order determines what he decides to do and has any impact on him coming out in the draft or not. We'll see what happens. But in any event, I thought that was an interesting comment by Zimba Sexy 1. You get to the next comment that I would like to read. Hold on one second. All right. It is from Corey Fitterman. And he says, Dwayne could have thrown for 5 touchdowns versus the Eagles. He missed the bench route you talked about that could have been to Sims right before the half. Also, the misconnection with Sims on the route he broke off that Dwayne didn't adjust to, which I'm not putting that on Dwayne. That just was a miscommunication. As Corey said, Sims broke out and he was wide ass open and Dwayne thought he was breaking in over the middle of the field. Those types of things happen. That's why repetition is so important so that you're on the same page with your receiver. Rarely do you see Michael Thomas and Drew Brees not on the same page. Why? Because of repetition. They've done it enough so that they know what the other is thinking. Back shoulder fade. I'm going to go up the field. It's an option route. So Drew has to be on the same page with Michael Thomas to know that he's going to take that option route and take it all the way up the field. Or you look at the coverage and he determines that he needs to come back to the football. When you've had a rapport with somebody and you know what they're thinking and they know what you're thinking, those types of miscommunications don't take place very often. And so that happened there. He says, and the fade route led him more. And yeah, I talked about that yesterday. Should have been up the field more. Sims would have ran under that. He had Avonte Maddox beat on the one that a lot of you thought was pass interference. I didn't necessarily think it was PI so much as a lot of you did. He said, and Sims could have 4 touchdowns and Terry with the 1 touchdown. I don't know if all of those would have went for touchdowns or not. I just know he could have had a little bit more of a productive day, but I still think it was a hell of a day by Dwayne in the football game. Derek Brown says, I really wish you could improve your audio and find a way to make it louder. Love your vids, just wish they were louder. Please find a solution. So I'm going to be really candid with you. I could turn my mic up. All right. I have the ability to turn it up right now if I want. The reason that I don't turn it up is, one, I don't want you hearing everything that's in my background. One, I have a loud and noisy computer, and I think you can still hear it to a certain degree, just not as loud as it would be if I turned up my mic. First of all, I think it's plenty loud, to be honest with you. I go back and I listen. No, is it loud as it could be? No, it could probably be a little bit louder. I agree. But I don't want you hearing everything in my background. I don't want you hearing my computer noise. I need a new computer. I'm going to get one. But until then, this one is making noise. I don't want you hearing that. I don't want you hearing my son who could potentially be crying in the background of in the house. I don't want you hearing that. I don't want you hearing all of the adjacent noise that's around me. I like to just hear my voice, if at all possible. And that's why I have the audio turned to the level that I have it at. Maybe in the future, I will turn it up as I don't have a noisy computer and my son's not making noise in the background. Maybe I will change the settings. But right now, I think it's at a good enough level that you can hear me loudly and clearly. And I think that it's good enough so that you don't hear everything in the background. So I just wanted to go ahead and clarify that right now. But I understand where you're coming from. It could be louder. I do understand that. But I think it's loud enough that you can hear everything that I'm saying and hear it concisely and clearly. So there's that. Another comment I wanted to read, and this also from Derek Brown. He says, I wish people would stop blaming O'Connell on his play calling, without knowing 100% if he has the freedom to call his, in quotation marks, plays and not run what the head coach desires. You just can't blame him for how this offense looks. Personally, I believe he's being asked to call the game in the mindset of the head coach. I think we've talked about that already, that this is not 100% his offense. What you're seeing from Kevin O'Connell isn't 100% what he would like to do. I think he's had more control over the last month of the season, calling plays, than, let's say, the Buffalo game or the Minnesota game where he didn't have a lot of control back then. I think since Dwayne has taken over full time and there's been a little bit more of a trust factor with O'Connell and Dwayne Haskins as to what Dwayne is capable of doing, comfortable doing, that sort of thing. I think you've seen more of an O'Connell influence on the offense. However, I still think there is a Callahan method to the madness that is the play calling right now. I think you're somewhat right in your assessment, though, Derek, that you cannot just go off of what you see and assume that it's all 100% Kevin O'Connell, because I do not think he has full autonomy to make all of the calls with what's going on in the flow of the game. So I'd like to say that it's at least 60-40 O'Connell right now, but that 40% it weighs heavy, because if Callahan wants to run the football, then, you know, O'Connell has to submit to what he wants with Callahan being the head coach. So I do think that is something that is something to keep in mind if you're a Redskins fan and you're looking at this offense and trying to assess what Kevin O'Connell has been during the stretch run of the season. Another comment that I wanted to get to, and it's the final one of the day, is from Daddy Smokes Yams. And he says, long comment alert. So he's giving us a disclaimer right off the bat. I feel like I'm the only one advocating keeping the Bill and Kevin connection around for a while. We should understand, despite the steady progress, Callahan is working with a hand-me-down staff, and Kevin O'Connell is still using Jay Gruden's playbook. Think about an offseason where the man can create his own offense and the head coach can hire his own guys. It's obviously Bill, he said, it's obvious Bill is older, and equally obvious Kevin isn't ready to be a head coach. Seems like the clear choice should be to hold on to Bill as the head coach because his discipline is having a good effect, and groom Kevin until he is ready to take over. Still keep the coach-quarterback relationship, and you understand the rest. The Rams did something similar with Dick Vermeil and Mike Martz, and the Cowboys also with Wade and Garrett. All right, Wade as in Wade Phillips and Jason Garrett. He said the front office solution is another long comment for a different day, LOL. So I thought that was a really interesting comment by Daddy Smoke Yams, because I'm not advocating for the Bill-Kevin connection as he stated, but I could see what you said makes perfectly good sense. It makes a ton of sense. However, how are you to know that Kevin O'Connell is the perfect candidate to be a head coach in waiting? How do we know that? How do we not know he's just not the guy to be a head coach in this league? How do we not know he's not Norv Turner, or he's not one of these other great offensive coordinators that just isn't meant to be a head coach? How do we know that? How do we know that these next 2 or 3 years that we give Bill Callahan isn't in vain? We don't know this to be the truth. Just like we don't know that your situation isn't the right way to go. And we don't know these things, but I do know this. Bill Callahan has been solid, but he's not the answer. And I would much rather go in a different direction than just kind of trudge through the mud the next couple of years with Bill Callahan making these mistakes and these flubs with in-game, lack of in-game adjustments, lack of game feel, lack of game management, time management, all of those things that we've seen him struggle with this year. Look, the team has played better. We had a low standard set when Jay was here. Our bar was set extremely and entirely way too low. But that's because we were preconditioned to bad football and a team that didn't make adjustments and a team that often wasn't ready to play. It's been a little bit different under Callahan. It's actually been a breath of fresh air at times. But at the same time, we can do better. We know that we can do better. We've seen Callahan. We know the track record. All right? He's been in this league before. It's not like this is something brand new. We've seen Callahan. We know what he's capable of. We know that there is grass that's much greener on the other side. Now, again, your comment makes perfectly good sense if the Redskins are thinking in that mindset that, hey, Kevin's going to be the next head coach here, but he's not ready. We don't want to lose him to someone else, and we don't want to bring another guy in here that's going to kind of murky and cloud up the situation. Let's just keep this thing status quo and keep it going. I don't want to do that. I'm not advocating for that. I know you are. And if the Redskins go in that direction, I would be pretty disappointed. And if you thought there was not a lot of juice heading into this season, just think about what a season of Callahan and Kevin O'Connell going into the year next year would look like. By the way, if that happens, most likely that means Bruce is back as well. So I think there is, under no circumstances do you bring in another guy from the outside as your GM or even promote from within and Bill Callahan remains your head coach. I don't see that happening. The only way I see the package of Bill and Kevin coming back is if Bruce is back. So I think you would have to be willing to sacrifice Bruce Allen staying to get that combination of Bill and Kevin O'Connell back as the Redskins head coach and offensive coordinator. But everything you said was spot on. You know, Callahan is pretty much coaching with a bunch of guys that he didn't necessarily sign off on. Kevin O'Connell is still running Jay Gruden's scheme. There's a lot of nuances to what has gone on the fly in a season in which you fire your head coach and everyone is essentially under interim or the head coach is under an interim tag. There's a lot that goes into that. But at the same time, I want to see this thing flushed. Everything new, including a new team president, and I just want to start anew. And that includes Bill, and that might even include Kevin. I would prefer Kevin stay on, but it just depends on who you hire and how this thing goes. Kevin may not want to stay. The person that comes in may not want Kevin to stay. There's so many moving parts, but I thought that was a really intriguing comment because you're not the only one that feels that way. I've heard other people advocate for not necessarily Kevin O'Connell, but for Bill Callahan to remain as the head coach. I don't agree with that, but we'll see what happens. There is so much that has been left to be determined yet. We don't know about Bruce's status. We don't know about Bill's status, the way this team is played. Anything's up for debate, you know what I mean? And I don't know what's going to take place, but I'm nervous. I can just tell you that because I have no confidence in this organization's ability to do the right thing. And I think the right thing is to fire Bruce and to start this thing over and allow the guy that you hire to hit the reset button as he sees fits. If he wants Kevin O'Connell to be back, if he wants Bill Callahan to be back, knock yourself out. But that should be up to the new guy that's hired. So we'll see what happens. But in any event, that's going to do it for this installment of the Redskins Nightly News. I thank you guys for joining me. Remember, like this video, subscribe to the Louie T Network if you haven't already done so. Share this video if at all possible. Also, keep in mind, we've got skin in the game. Why? Because we're Skins fans for life. I'm your man, Louie T, signing off. We will jump on live at some point this season or week. Remember, there is no Thursday night football, so Thursday may be that sweet spot where we're able to jump on live because Thursday night football is over for the season. We'll get 3 games on Saturday, so that's going to be a treat to have a triple header on Saturday. But as far as Thursday night is concerned, no more Thursday night football. That's how you know the season is coming to a close as we have no Thursday night football. So that would probably be the best pocket for us to go live. I will keep you abreast of that situation, whether I change it to Wednesday or we go with it on Thursday. Either way, this has been the Redskins Nightly News. I'm your man, Louie T. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Louie T.